Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Talia Marcajani, and I'm here to answer a question that I get often, but that I got today again. And the question was, I've discovered that I have a dairy intolerance, and which was manifesting as physical inflammatory symptoms, such as eczema, migraines, acne, increased inflammation, which can cause pain, swelling, and redness. So I've discovered I have a dairy intolerance. I can't eat dairy without getting inflammatory symptoms. Can I still have lactose-free milk or lactose-free dairy products? And essentially what this question is asking, and what I want to talk about, is what's the difference between an intolerance, a sensitivity that causes inflammatory symptoms, and a food allergy. So we have these three categories of ways that food can go wrong, these three main ways that food can affect us. So the first one is a food allergy. A true allergy is mediated by an antibody called IgE, which is mediated then by histamine, a chemical in our body that causes swelling and redness and inflammation, and that causes these symptoms very acutely. So, for example, you're allergic to peanuts, you eat some peanuts, you experience swelling because of histamine, and that can constrict the airways, leading to something called anaphylaxis, which requires you to inject yourself with an EpiPen and call 911 to calm down that swelling that can kill you. A food allergy happens almost immediately after consuming or coming into contact with the food. It doesn't require very much of that food, so even a few molecules of that food could trigger that reaction, depending on how sensitive you are. It also manifests as things like asthma and hives, and this is what's diagnosed via a skin prick test, where a little bit of each antigen is pricked into the top layer of the dermis of the skin, and an allergist will look for signs of swelling. So a food allergy is pretty obvious to identify because it's within the time frame of a food that you've just recently consumed. So if you all of a sudden break out into hives, it's probably something that you consumed the meal before. A food intolerance is something different. An intolerance is actually not related to the immune system at all. An intolerance is often a deficiency in an enzyme in our digestive system that is needed to break down that food, or an intolerance could also mean just something that impairs the absorption of a specific component of a food, most commonly a carbohydrate or a fiber. So we have the FODMAP, so the fructooligosaccharides, monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polyols, which people can have intolerances to. Or we have the classic lactose intolerance. So lactose is a molecule that consists of two sugar molecules stuck together, so glucose and galactose. In order to digest and absorb those two sugars, our body needs to cleave those two sugars using an enzyme called lactase, and then we can absorb the glucose, use it for energy, and then absorb the galactose, convert it into glucose, and use that for energy. If you don't make lactase enzyme in your gut, you can't absorb the lactose molecule. And what happens is something called osmotic diarrhea, where you start to draw water into the colon, and then bacteria can start to ferment the lactose and break it down, and you start to get bloating, gas, diarrhea, watery stools. So this isn't actually something involved systemically. You're not going to get a migraine, you're not going to get eczema, you're not going to get joint pain or notice inflammatory symptoms from an intolerance necessarily. But you will get gut symptoms, and you'll get those gut symptoms again immediately after consuming that food, because it'll be within the meal that you've just consumed. So you consume a bunch of ice cream. If you have digestive issues, that's the lactose intolerance showing up. The third thing, though, that this particular patient was dealing with is a food sensitivity. A food sensitivity is mediated by an antibody called IgG antibody versus the IgE antibody, type 1 sensitivity reaction, that was mediating the allergy. So IgG has type 4 hypersensitivity reactions, which create a slower inflammatory process that in some way is involved in intestinal permeability. Most of our immune system lives along the lining of our digestive system, and our immune system is always sampling things that we're eating and allowing some of that food to pass through our intestinal barrier. If your body develops a sensitivity to a certain food, that can manifest as more intestinal permeability, which can in some way manifest as more inflammation in the body, which manifests as more intestinal permeability, more inflammation, and you enter into this vicious cycle. For some reason, the immune system is not happy with a particular food that you're consuming, and it's creating IgG antibodies against that food, treating that food as if it's a foreign invader or dangerous pathogen, and those antibodies are triggering inflammation. So they find IgG antibody protein complexes in the joints of people with rheumatoid arthritis. And so if you are sensitive to dairy, you're probably reacting to one of the two main proteins in dairy, casein or whey, or whey. Most often it's casein, specifically alpha-1 casein. And so your body is mounting an immune response against that food as if it were a kind of bacteria or virus or something dangerous to the body. And that's creating systemic, so whole body inflammation. These sensitivities are delayed. It's called delayed hypersensitivity reaction, IgG mediated. And so when you consume dairy, you may not get a reaction minutes to hours later. It may take hours to days after consuming that food to develop the inflammatory symptoms. So if dairy gives you eczema, it may take a couple of days for your skin to start breaking out and for the inflammation to start manifesting after you consume the dairy. So how we diagnose sensitivities is through an elimination diet, where you remove the food for a period of time. I typically take my patients off food for a month just to reduce the symptom severity, and then we reintroduce the food systematically in high doses. So if it's dairy, we're doing kefir 3 times a day until a reaction is triggered, if it's triggered at all. And that's going to tell us the information we need. So essentially we're removing the food, allowing the body a chance to decrease its levels of inflammation. And then we're putting the food back in to see if it creates an inflammatory response. Because it's really difficult to parse out what food could be the problem, what food could be at the source of inflammatory symptoms, if these inflammatory symptoms are delayed and can happen days after consuming a food, and we're consuming food 4 times a day. So if you have a dairy sensitivity and you consume lactose-free milk or lactose-free ice cream, you're still going to respond to the proteins which are still in that food, so casein and or whey, and those are going to trigger an inflammatory reaction. So you may have a dairy sensitivity and a lactose intolerance at the same time, and therefore consuming lactose-free milk will decrease your symptoms because you're not going to get those immediate gastrointestinal symptoms. But if you suffer from systemic food sensitivity symptoms, such as migraines, such as weight gain, such as acne, even endometriosis has been associated with alpha-1 casein sensitivity, you're still going to get those symptoms, regardless of whether the food has lactose in it or not. So, hope that clarified some things. My name is Dr. Talia Marcajani, and feel free to visit the link in my bio to download a copy of the Hormone Hijack Guide. So these are hormonal imbalances that can hijack your mental health, and it's complete with a list of symptoms to watch for and lab tests to consider ordering to find out what hormonal imbalances could lie at the root of any mental health, mood, low energy conditions. Take care.